Welcome to the Drunk Dietitians podcast, co-hosted by your favorite tipsy registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, co-owner of Dietitians of Palm Valley, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy, Strong, Healthy. Us dietitian besties can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again. Although we're medical professionals, we are human too. We are not afraid to share our deepest secrets and how years of our lives were taken by diet culture. We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So grab your favorite cocktail and join us for our favorite casual happy hour and expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow. Cheers. Welcome back to another episode of Drunk Dietitians. We are actually giggling
and crying.
I knew we had Fiona Sutherland on today, who is an Australian dietitian paving the non-diet approach, anti-diet movement, health at every size. She was a big part of my transition into the intuitive eating realm. And so I was so excited to have her chat with Jenna.
I was so nervous.
But she is the most kind, just so intelligent. This episode is I really think it's going to be one of the most helpful episodes we give off, because Jenna was so vulnerable with everyone, and it almost became kind of like a counseling session.
For right? Sure. I don't really think there's words to describe what I've gotten out of this episode. It's pretty pivotal for me. And I think that for everybody listening, if you are a dietitian and you're confused about where you stand in this nutritionally heated, charged world, I mean, Fiona,
diet culture.
Yeah, bubble. Fiona has this very calming way of just kind of telling you everything's going to be okay, but here's what you need to do next. And that's what I have the chills from that. And just to get sappy for a second, I've watched my friend Sammy blossom into the place where she is, where she's impacting so many people's lives. And just let me keep talking here. Okay. So I'm now still in New Jersey. Sammy's in Florida. And because obviously we're connected in different ways, a lot of, my followers and her followers were similar at a time. And, as a friend, to hear people talking about my friend who's states and states and states away, and how her message is so loud and clear and strong, and how it's resonating with people in New Jersey, and, hearing people talk about it in gyms, that was a moment of aha for me. That was so beautiful. But then today, to hear the rapport between you and Fiona, and how much she sees you as the next person leading the charge in this movement, she really does. And you could see that in the way she spoke to you today. And it was just so beautiful. And I hope to be following in your footsteps, continuously. So this episode was emotional. It was fun. It was inspiring. And I can't wait to hear what everyone's feedback is.
Yeah, it's seriously, Jenna. Well, first of all, thank you for all that I just said, but thank you for being so vulnerable, because I share on this episode a time that I first met Fiona, and I was literally bawling my eyes out like a baby. And so you guys will hear more of details about that in this episode. But being a dietitian in today's day and age with this horrendous diet culture it's insanity. And I was ready to leave the career of a dietitian within the past few years. And I know Fiona had a similar story, so she shares that. And so this episode by far is my favorite one we've ever recorded. I think it's so real. It's authentic. I think it's going to help hundreds of thousands of dietitians and RDs to be, and just people that just feel that confusion. Because I know that's something that hasn't gone away for me yet. And I don't think it ever will. We live in a horrible diet culture, but Fiona's amazing. She's one of the world's leading researchers, and amazing supervision to dietitians all over the globe. So
and wait until you hear her beautiful Australian accent. You're going to be like, I never want to listen to Jenna's New Jersey voice and Sammy's Pittsburgh voice ever again. Like, bring on more Australians.
Yeah, and we will. We have an Australian on Monday. We're recording.
That's right.
Lots of Aussies. But without further ado, let's jump in. And I can't wait to hear people's feedback on this episode. So let's get it started. Welcome back to another episode of Drunk Dietitians.
Oh, yes.
And this one is actually one of our first Friday night episodes, which is really exciting.
It's a true happy hour.
It's a true happy hour for us, but for our beautiful guest, Fiona Sutherland, is it 8 or 9 a.m. there right now?
It's 9 a.m.
It's 9 a.m. So we have an Aussie with us. And it's 9 a.m. in Australia right now. It's Saturday for her, Friday for us, which we're excited about. But we have a very special guest, Miss Fiona Sutherland here. Some of you might recognize her as the Mindful Dietitian on Instagram. She's an anti-diet, HAES-centered dietitian who practices mindfulness. She's a yoga teacher. She hails from Melbourne, Australia. She's the director of the Mindful Dietitian and Body Positive Australia. Has many, well, as we'll get into, I was going to say many certifications, but on Australia, we just learned that they fly a little freely over there and don't have technical certifications from a back-end standpoint, but she has so much experience with eating disorder, has been a dietitian for over 15 years. She's a sports dietitian. We could go literally on for an hour about all of your credentials. So without further ado, we're going to have Jenna jump in, Fee, and give you a little bit of a rapid fire. And then we're just going to get going. So thank you.
I just want to listen to you talk. Literally.
I tell you what, my kids don't want to listen to me talk, so that feels nice. Thank you.
All day. Anytime you need to say anything, you can give us a call, okay?
Okay.
All right. So I added in one new one today, but I'm going to start with an original. Wine or beer?
Oh, you know what? Depends on the season.
So I'm
gonna say for now, I'm gonna say beer because it's summer here.
I was just gonna say it's warm by you. Okay, what kind of beer? Now that I gotta know.
Well, do you know what's really funny is when I was on my last trip to the States, when I met Sammy and we hung out, I was co-facilitating and co-presenting a series of non-diet workshops with Hayley Goodrich, who is a real beer aficionado. And she taught me so much about beer and helped me understand what I liked and what I didn't like. And what I came to understand is that I was making all these assumptions about beer. I guess in lots of ways, the way people make assumptions about food likes or dislikes, or cuisines, or all these kind of ways that we develop relationships with food and with alcohol, apparently. And so it seems as though East Coast IPAs are my favourite. And also I've come to really like sour beers and also what's called a milk stout.
That's my beer. I love those.
I don't think I have
it's like drinking chocolate milk. It's so good.
Is that the one? Didn't you have one, Jenna, the one time that was like a peanut butter chocolate something?
Yes. When I went to California, my brother and I, we sat down at a restaurant and it was like midday and I ordered the peanut butter stout and the woman was like, oh, that's a little heavy for lunchtime. I was like, bring me two. Like, leave me alone.
Thank you, judgy lady.
Right. Like, I'll take two, thank you. They're so good.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I love this already. It says wine or beer was beer right now. Tequila or vodka?
A vodka, definitely.
How about this one? Would you rather read a real book or use a Kindle?
Well, I do have a Kindle, but my preference is a book.
Me too. Cats or dogs?
Ooh. I definitely grew up as a dog person, and I would still say I'm leaning towards dog. But we have now had a cat for about 12 months or so, and he's a rescue. We got him as a young adult rescue, and I just love his sassiness. He's like, I love you, now I don't, now pat me, feed me, go away, come here. And just his sass, I just love it. He's just, he basically tells us what to do. He takes no shit, and I just really like that. Whereas dogs are like, play with me. Oh, I love you.
Yeah.
I love you all the time. Come and play with me. Oh, yes, I love your lap, you know. Whereas cats like, no, go away.
Yeah.
You're being annoying.
Yep.
You know,
So good.
feed me.
That's great.
Now go away. So
Okay, snow or sand?
sand, definitely.
Excellent.
I'm Australian. Come on.
It's fair. Okay, here's a big one for me and Sam. We have a debate going on. Would you rather have crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Do you know what? I'm going to put myself out there. I don't like peanut butter.
Oh
my
I've
God.
never met anybody
Oh
like
my
you.
goodness. If everybody listening could see your faces. So what just happened there, everybody listening?
We'll
is
have to share that clip.
The
both
horror.
Jenna and Sammy visibly like launched back in their seats. Shocked.
We've never got that
Faces.
answer before at all.
It's like a universal like love, I guess, but maybe not.
Well,
okay,
yeah,
I'll
you
take
know,
it.
You know, we haven't had
No.
someone be allergic to peanut butter yet, too. So we have
That's
to be
true.
very
Oh,
mindful of that.
No, I
Not
just
that
don't like it.
don't like
No.
it.
Actually, I like peanut butter and chocolate things
Toge-
together.
okay.
So I like
Yeah.
peanuts. I like the flavor. There's something about, I don't know, maybe it was the smooth texture that I don't like. So if I was to choose, if I was in a situation where I needed like a high energy snack, and I had very little choice, then I would say crunchy. So how's that?
I'll take it. Cheers to that. All right, now here's our last question is if you could have one thing in limitless quantities, but it couldn't be money, what would it be?
That is such a good question. I would say time with my kids.
I love that.
I would say, yeah, I know that sounds a little bit like, yeah,
No
but
way.
but I would say, yeah, time with my kids. You know, because as much as they drive me around the twist, they're just so dear. Like they're really dear. They're now in upper elementary school, so they're 8 and 10. They're just really passionate about like life, which I love.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say that because I can already see my older one starting to have friend preferences over parent preferences, and yeah, I can slightly see things shifting. So I'm like, oh, I just really want
Yeah.
the time with my kids. Yeah.
Remind us, do you have two boys? Do you have, I forget.
do.
Okay, that's what I thought.
do.
Boy
I
mom,
do,
yeah.
and they are obsessed with sport, like completely.
Yeah.
Like my younger one has remarkably, he has an LA shirt which has got Kobe Bryant on the back of it. So since, you know, God rest his soul, Kobe Bryant passed away only last week, he's been constantly wearing this shirt.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, they are absolutely passionate about anything to do with sport, and mostly Australian sport, except for, no, that's not true. It can be anything that involves any implement. So tennis, rackets, cricket bats, any size ball, any pace of ball, they love it. So yeah, we've got Saturday is sports day for us.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it makes for a very busy lifestyle, but it's so
Sure
rewarding.
does. It's so fun. It's really fun. You know, we are a very busy family, and it's also lots of fun. So it's all good. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we're going to jump right in because I feel like I want to keep you for like 7 hours and ask you a million things and just pick your brain, but we're just going to jump right in because we know we don't have that time with you. So for everyone listening, I guess, and you do so many things. That's the hard thing with you. Like if someone says like, what do you do? Like that's probably such a really hard question.
I smash diet culture and eat it for breakfast. With you, Sammy.
But so how do you explain, I want you to think about, well, there's two questions to this. One, for our listeners, I want you to pretend like this group listening has never heard of HAES and has no idea what it is. So can you explain health at every size, otherwise known as HAES, to our listeners and what it means and just your work within that field?
Sure. So if I if I'm meeting someone for the first time, and especially in professional circles, this happens fairly frequently, that often it will depend on the context that I'm meeting someone to how I would explain what it is that I do. And
Mhm.
what I will often explain, what I'll often start with is something that the other person can draw on as a commonality. So, for example, if I'm meeting somebody who I know already has some mental health awareness or some awareness of social justice issues, or they happen to also be another woman or a femme, then I'll kind of start explaining what I do from a place where perhaps the other person can understand, maybe not so much from a lived experience
Mhm.
point of view in terms of their relationship with food, eating, and body, but more something that we can more globally understand. So to answer your first question, which was about health at every size. So health at every size, or shortened to HAES, HAES, is a registered trademark for the Association for Size Diversity and Health, otherwise known as ASDA, which is based in the US, and it's also a registered trademark by HAES Australia now, which is really exciting. And the purpose really of trademarking is that the principles and philosophies of health at every size remains aligned with its intention, its intended use. So it's a weight inclusive paradigm and series of 5 principles which invites us to broaden our view, I guess, and our practice philosophies specifically for health professionals and communities too. But a lot of people who would adopt health at every size principles are kind of health professionals in some way, shape, or form. And it's an invitation to broaden, lengthen, and deepen our lens of how we understand what we name as quote unquote health. So again, it's an inclusive set of principles and paradigms, which also incorporates a sense of social justice and equity. So it invites us really to look at who gets to even have access to the possibility of better quote unquote health. I'll stop saying quote unquote health. I'll
Yeah.
just say health.
Cool.
But I say quote unquote because health is something that is not only not necessarily available to lots of people, but the possibility of improved health is not necessarily available. And that's a systemic problem as opposed to, or a problem that is rooted in our culture, systems in our culture, as opposed to that it's somebody's individual issue or problem, which stops them from being able to kind of pursue health or health behaviours. So it really, the overall purpose of these principles is really to not only examine the systems that are in place which stop people from being able to access or pursue opportunities for better health, but then also how we can open up those opportunities for people, how we can increase access for all people existing in all bodies at all stages of health and well-being, so that it becomes a fairer place. Equal is a whole nother ball game. Okay, but for something to be fair and equitable really invites us to look at, not only what are the systems in place, but how as health professionals can we make contributions to improving access and equitable care for all people.
Yeah. That was such an amazing answer. And then my next question, right, is like, so how do we do it? How have you been breaking ground? And I know a big part of what you do, and you can kind of let our listeners know, like, what is the mindful dietitian, right? Like, what is that? And how you're training other dietitians. And I guess I skipped right over that because I got too excited to ask you a question. For everyone listening, the reason Fee and I were introduced originally, now, is it safe to say, were you Haley's supervisor originally? Was she getting supervision from you? Okay. All right. Okay. So Haley Goodrich, a dietitian that was in my dietetic internship class, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before we even became dietitians. We became very close, and then kind of went our separate ways, went into the professional world. And I remember just seeing, once Haley switched over to private practice, just seeing this message of intuitive eating and HAES. And I was like, what the hell is that? Like I literally had never seen it before, never heard about it before. And then in that time, I was also feeling things like I need to leave the dietetic field, because it was very weight centric. It was very, here's how you teach people to lose weight. Here's what you have to give them. Here's what you have to do. And I just felt this confliction. And so Haley and I kind of stayed close over the years. And then she now, like Fee was saying, they do workshops all over. Now, are you guys doing them in Australia coming up too, right? Or did you already?
No, we have just confirmed our San Diego location, but we're doing Portland and San Diego in May. So we're really excited.
That's fun. So you guys are hitting up the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So I went out in, that was September of 2019. I met Fiona in Washington, D.C. at their non-diet approach principles, practice, and purpose workshops, where it's teaching dietitians, teaching medical professionals or people in the health industry how to use this non-diet approach and how to start to bring that into practice. And one of my favorite terms I think I learned that weekend, which is not like an official term, but was splinter-assing. And that is something, Fee, why don't you let us, tell us what splinter-assing is, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. So I actually can't clearly recall how it came about, but I think it came about maybe in a conversation thread on maybe Facebook or something like this. And I feel like maybe someone like Deb Burgard, who is arguably one of my greatest teachers, mentors, friends, colleagues, and has been really instrumental in the early health at every size movement, especially in the US. So I just want to kind of give a nod to her. I have a feeling she's, so Deb has this incredible, dry, hard-hitting, wonderful, I just adore her sense of humor. And I think she said something and I was like, oh yeah, that's called splinter-assing or something like that anyway. And everyone was laughing and I was like, okay, class clown. I'm just going to take this and run with a hashtag. And there you go. So from there, I started using it as a hashtag to describe people who are sitting on the fence, pretty much. So I don't need to give you a clear image there, but it's a fence sitter, shall we say? And so by fence sitting, I think what I want to be clear about is that it's not always intentional. And it's not always obvious either, you know. I also want to put out my hand and just say really clearly, I was a splinter ass for years. And Sammy's kind of put up her hand too. I think we need to start with being really honest with ourselves as well.
I feel like I am one, and that's why my hand didn't go up.
But this is a great time to talk about it, because we have the ass creator right here.
Right. And I mean, I say that with obviously I hope obviously because I'm here on this podcast with you right now that like my heart and soul is in the HAES and intuitive eating movement. I just haven't become certified in that practice. But I was really interested in this conversation to hear like how this came about for you. And, you know, I'm just looking at the notes from our intern and like, you know, you didn't start out obviously in this part of the field. So can you tell us a little more? I don't mean to interrupt the definition, but a little bit more about, you know, how it came to be.
And how I was and now
and how I was on one side of the fence, and then I was definitely like, it's also called paradigm straddling. I guess that's the proper term. I prefer splinter ass, but you know, before really, you know, firmly being on one side of the fence. And that also doesn't mean, I've got to be honest, I mean, it also doesn't mean that I don't mess it up and accidentally or unintentionally kind of splinter us still to this day. And I'm so fortunate to have people around me, you know, supervisors and support networks and communities who are able to call me in on that stuff, you know, who are able to say, oh, hey, you missed that bit, or, oh, I don't, you know, you didn't quite get that, I think, the way that you intended to, like, you know, how might that might land for people, or you know, I try to be really intentional with my language, and I think that's a little bit where it comes, where it the groundwork of it is being really intentional and understanding our language and how that really makes a difference, the words that we use and the words that we understand as being helpful and harmful and everything in between. So just to kind of reverse here to answer your question, Jenna. So I really started off very much in weight-centric practice. I mean, that was the way that I was trained. That's all I was exposed to. I definitely grew up in a very weight-centric family where, you know, particular bodies were regarded in particular ways in terms of praise and criticism was really overt. It wasn't subtle, it was really overt. And so although I wasn't necessarily exposed to a lot of the obvious dieting behavior, the language and the attitudes towards various people in various bodies and various ways of showing up in the world, that was not hidden at all. And so I kind of swallowed that hook, line and sinker, you know, as many humans do in the world, and especially as a female and femme, you know, living in this world. So I guess as a dietitian, I didn't necessarily have a vision of what kind of dietitian I wanted to be. And, you know, 20 years ago, which is when I graduated, there wasn't really a community. There wasn't a non-diet community. I didn't have that language. But it was actually through just personal conversations with my clients, and I realized something was really wrong. And the mistake I made early on was thinking that I wasn't doing good enough. Like, I wasn't doing the weight loss work good enough. Like, it was my fault. And I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in between, but I actually didn't blame my clients. I blamed myself. So I became very close to dropping out of the profession. And in fact, I lived in Canada for 2 years and didn't work as a dietitian. And when I came back from Canada, I kind of needed a job that paid more than $15 an hour. So I ended up in a weight loss practice. And it was really there that I just heard this repetitive, you know, message. And so that was where I started to do non-diet weight loss. And that is like that is obvious fence sitting. So let's talk about, first of all, obvious fence sitting. So non-diet weight loss, or for example, mindful eating for weight loss, or non-diet portion control. Like, to this day, and I can see you nodding along, Sammy, it's really obvious to us now.
But it wasn't to me originally. And that's where a lot of dietitians, I think, listening, it's like we hear these, and I posted about this like right before we got on today, because I sent Jenna your podcast.
I listened, yes.
With Fiona Willer, episode 49 of The Mindful Dietitian, which we'll link in the show notes, but just about her research of dietitians and exposure to this message. And I think I just relate to it so much because I think you first hear it and you know in your soul it's right, but then you've been trained in this weight centric lens, and then you're like, hear this weight inclusive message, and you're like, well, what do I do? And so you kind of try, and again, that's like how you were, Fee. Like, I was like, okay, can I make this work? And then now being on the other side, it's like, whoa, how did I do that? But at the time I was like, no, I'm doing good. I'm figuring it out. Right?
Absolutely. So there's two things there. The first is that, you know, one of the core elements of being a human is we want to be good people. We desire to be good people in the world and do good things, and also to be seen as good people. Now, how that shows up and how we frame that can, oh my goodness, in a billion different ways, right? And sometimes we want to feel good because we have a sense of belonging, and our behaviors might not always be helpful to the world, but we have a sense of belonging, which serves that purpose of feeling good and being a good person. So especially as dietitians, and I suppose health promoting or helping professionals, I guess you would say, that there's that core of us that we want to really help people. We don't want to hurt people. We don't get into medicine and nursing and dietetics and physiotherapy and all that kind of stuff if we're thinking, oh no, I'm not interested in helping people.
Yeah.
So I think what happens is there's this cognitive dissonance that happens when it becomes a little bit more into our vision, into our kind of field of vision, that maybe what we have believed and maybe actually what we've done in the world maybe has harmed people. And what that does is it kind of puts us in this very difficult position where that very core of who we want to be in the world is actually called to question. And so usually you'll have a couple of different responses. One is that people become quite defensive because they desperately need to defend a sense of being a good person and good in the world. And that this internal conflict of, hang on a second, what are you saying? Are you saying I'm not a good person? I am a good person. I'm going to defend my position. This is doing good in the world. I do help people. People are grateful to me. People like me. I'm a nice person.
And I've seen that. And I feel like on social media, and I know we've talked about this off air, there's been some situations where, people are like, I'm helping people. And I get that. Because again, those are definitely first thoughts that went through my head when I was first kind of introduced to this. That's like that. It's exactly the response.
Definitely. And unless we stay aware of that response, unfortunately, what happens is we then turn away from opportunities where we can learn. It's really unfortunate, actually, that as humans, we're not, well, and as health professionals, we're not encouraged to turn towards those feelings and to be curious about them, and to think, like what's going on here? We're so uncomfortable with discomfort. And as I said before, the conflict that arises between, hang on a second, but I'm a good person and people like me. And, what does this mean in terms of who I am in the world and what I do in the world and my whole degree, maybe? Or my whole philosophy, or even my own personal experience. What does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the other more other response is more what I alluded to before, is that leaning in of, tell me more, help me understand more. This is not something that I've come across. I'm feeling a bit, I'm feeling either a bit uncomfortable or super uncomfortable. But I want to know more. And so I think, I actually can't often predict which way people are going to go. And sometimes it's a little bit in the middle, some initial defensiveness and then some curiosity. So what really one of my main aims with the Mindful Dietitian is cultivating a community where we can just be more curious and where discomfort can be invited rather than turned away from. So that's one of my main goals with this community is really supporting people to turn towards those feelings, and then supporting people to support each other to, so in workplaces or maybe local chapters or, local community groups, or whether that's collegial or personal, that we can support each other to be more courageous rather than to shut down and just kind of go along with the status quo and do what we've always done. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of uncomfortable truths that we are still yet to face in dietetics, the harms we've done, the people that we've really, really hurt. Most notably over the past 50 years culturally, I would say 50 or 60 years culturally, but then also with the kind of the whitewashing of nutrition and the Eurocentrism of nutrition. But then more recently, I guess over the past 30 to 40 years with the whole weight loss stuff and how we have unwittingly become, become frontline weight loss people. That's not the core of our training at all. I've got a 5-year degree, and we're so highly clinically skilled, and yet we end up kind of being, stalwarts for the weight loss industry, which I just just is sickening to me.
Yeah, as Fiona Willer put it in your podcast, like dietitians just using like weight loss as their party trick. Like that's I love how that analogy. And it's so easy for people to kind of like feed off of that because it's like, oh wait, look, I'm effective and here's how. And I know like entering the field, that's again, it's something that we're taught. And that's where it's such a difficult conversation. I have RDs to be and registered dietitians all the time. And I'm sure you do too as well, Fee, like messaging me like, what do I do? Like, how do I do this? And that's where today I shared, again, that stuff from your podcast, just kind of alluding to how hard it has been. And I think Fiona and Jenna, because I told Jenna about this, can both attest, like, how was I leaving your workshop, Fiona?
I have never seen somebody head to a bar so quickly in my life, Sammy.
I went to Penn State right after that with my roommate, but I was bawling. Like, there's no other way to put it. Like, I could probably start crying right now even thinking about it. And that's like when I met Christy Harrison. So I was like shaking. I was talking to you. I was like,
she has that effect.
I know, right? She's like a celebrity. And you as well.
She's so real. She's so real.
No, I know. No, she was amazing. She was like, I know you. And I was like, yeah, we probably talked about Fuck Diet Culture Friday at some point. But I was a mess. And I think it was, like you said, it was like that cognitive dissonance. And it's just that I never felt so heard by so many people that weekend. And just like knowing that I was leaving that weekend and having to go back to diet culture and my business and all of these things and not have that group of however many amazing non-diet approach women in one room. It's hard because diet culture is everywhere, and it's really hard to do alone, and it's hard to make that shift. And that was I looked back, I have it somewhere in my purse. I think I brought with me my non-diet approach like workshop booklet that you guys gave us. And my goal for that weekend was to pull splinters out of my ass. I opened the book and that's what I had written down. So, but like you said, it's still working on it every day. It's not about being perfect or feeling like, okay, I don't do that anymore. I'm this perfect anti-diet, non-diet dietitian. But it's just continuously learning. And I think that's something that both you and Haley have cultivated, that community of just keep being curious, keep leaning into those emotions. It's hard, but keep doing it.
Definitely.
I think want to teach a killer yoga class too, Fiona.
From what I learned.
Yeah. But like, honestly, everything that you're saying, like my husband teaches yoga, and like a lot of the verbiage that you're using right now, I'm like, oh, okay. I hear some of this in his practice as well. Like, what a good counterpoint for you.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, my mindfulness practice and my yoga practice is the reason. Actually, and community and supervision. Oh my God. Yes, supervision saves me every day. Those are the reasons why I can also gather the kind of the energy and the focus to keep going, because there are times when I feel like, fuck, like, where I feel like I'm batting up against brick walls left, right and center, whether that's kind of training organizations or community groups or just general diet culture, just in general.
Everywhere.
This big nebulous thing it is. But, I think part of it, to kind of get a little bit concrete about it, one of the things that I find can be helpful is starting off with something that might be familiar to us as dietitians. So many dietitians will be really familiar with the behavioural change model, the stages of change, which is a model, originally designed by Francesca and Di Clemente many years ago now. Like, it's not new, but what it does is it goes through stages of change. So there's pre-contemplation. In the old days when we didn't kind of have good language around it, we called this denial. So let's not call things denial anymore. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance. And although you can see with my hands, on a podcast this doesn't work, but it's not a straight line. It's not a nice neat round circle. I mean, change doesn't work like that. It's imagine a tangled ball of yarn. That's kind of what it is, really, more than anything else, stages of change. So if we think about this and what we already understand this in our work with clients, I think it gives us a foundation not only to view common humanity, like we are humans too, and we find change hard, and we're going to find lots of reasons not to change and lots of reasons to stay comfortable. But I think kind of drawing on those principles, we can consider, like, where am I along that stage of change? Am I contemplative, or am I in preparation? And what's the work that I am willing to do in order to move me further along into action, into the doing? And often the doing is not necessarily behavioral. It sometimes is, but often the doing, often the kind of action stuff is more being willing to do reflective work. So the behaviour might be to engage in regular supervision with somebody who can really help to hold a space for you and with you. But that the other parts of action might be a little less obvious. It's more about self-reflection, moment to moment, those moment to moment live opportunities for us to lean into the discomfort of new things, and risking messing it up, because that's one thing that people are like, well, if I'm going to mess it up, then I'm not going to do it. And it's like, hang on a second, we're kind of mimicking diet culture then. If we're going to be perfect about it, perfectionism is like diet culture's number one minion. Right?
Yep.
So if we're anti-diet and we're anti-diet culture, we're not anti-people who want to diet, because we're all swimming in this swamp together, right? We're not anti-people, but if we're anti-diet and anti-diet culture, then, we're going to mess it up. We need to be willing to not fall into the same patterns that diet culture demands of us, and one of those is perfectionism. So anyway, I've gone totally off track.
No,
Amazing.
not even. It's definitely a lot to think about, and there's just so many like tidbits that you've given so clearly. I don't even know where to start.
I was going to say, like, Jenna, I want to hear your questions, because I've, walked through some of this with Fee, so I want to hear where your brain's at.
All I can think about is the day. So Sammy FaceTimed me after the weekend that you guys were all away, and she was literally laying horizontal on a couch in her office, and she was like this, like, for everyone not watching us right now, her phone was in the air, her face was down, like she was like, I don't know what to do anymore, like crying. She was drinking in her office.
I felt like I didn't have an identity. I felt like I had spent so much time in this culture that was like a lie. And again, I don't want people to think like when I went to that weekend that was the first time I heard the anti-diet.
No, because it wasn't. No. And Haley, which I said on social media today, she has been a friend, a colleague, and a supervisor to push me to say, hey, like, about that post, like, I want to just offer some feedback. And to me, like, again, it was uncomfortable. Like, I don't want people to think it was like, oh, perfect. Like, I'll just change my messaging. That's all it is. But it's uncomfortable. You have to do self-reflection. You have to say, what was my intention behind the post? Is that going to bring people shame? How is that going to affect their behavior? But then getting to a realization of like, okay, like, I am ready to take action, like full action. Now what?
So let me ask you both this. As practitioners that treat and help people in this space, at what point do we think that we need to become like certified in a mental health certification instead of nutrition? Because like right now in my own practice, I still talk, and I know you both do too, but I still talk a lot about food, right? Like people still have a lot of questions about food, but what I'm hearing and feeling from both of you is that majority of the conversations have really nothing to do with food, and it's more of that inner work and that inner or retrospect. So do you believe in your hearts that like we should be getting other certifications in this space?
So,
I don't even know if that was a question or a
no,
thought.
it is such a good question. It's such a good question, Jenna, and it's actually a question I get a lot is, but we're not psychologists. Why were we doing this? Okay, so the first thing is that actually food has a lot to do with everything. The relationship that we have with food and eating and our bodies mirrors a lot of other ways that we relate to ourselves and the world. And so I often will use food and eating and body image examples to kind of illustrate how we kind of show up in the world, because even things like the way that we perform or pretend or do perfectionism. I love peas, by the way. You've noticed, the way that we show up in the world has a lot to do. There's so many parallels with how we interact with food. So I would say, I'm going to be really honest with you, talking about food and nutrition as an entity, I find extremely boring. I just find it boring.
Like
whereas when we're using food and eating relationships and thinking about it more as a dynamic rather than this is an inanimate object. I mean, not everybody would say it's inanimate. Okay, let's not even go there. But let's talk about this object, food, and then I am a separate entity. And I don't actually see it that way. I see it all as such a dynamic process. It's not only food, it's also our beliefs, our attitudes, and the emotions that arise, and then sensations in the body. And it's also just so dynamic. And you can even hear by the way I'm talking, I'm passionate about this stuff. I think you can't separate it. We all have a relationship with food, even if it's super, super, super shitty. We all have a relationship with it. So I think that's the missing piece, is that we are trained to kind of see food and a human being as separate.
Yeah.
And I mean, that kind of, it makes me think of, Descartes' early philosophies, I think, therefore I am, which is like, no, not really Descartes, but anyway, like, I'm more a fan of like maybe some of Freud's early work, or, some of the psychoanalytic stuff that's so psychodynamic stuff that's just it's so fascinating and interesting. But the truth is that I really think this is a vital part of being a dietitian, is understanding that we're not separate. We are not separate to our clients. We are so similar. We're much more similar than different. Yeah. And we are all dealing with this very complex dynamic in this world, which tells us that we should be doing things in certain ways, we shouldn't be doing things in certain ways, and we all kind of get involved. So do I think we need an extra qualification? No, I actually don't think that's the case. Do I think that the base qualification is sufficient for most people? No, I actually think we need to do lots more behavior change stuff. So lots more motivational interviewing, maybe acceptance and commitment therapy, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, all this stuff, which invites us to look at food and eating and body image and eating behaviors not as separate to the person, but a vital part of how we support people in their healing process, whatever that means. So I'm not just talking about eating disorders or complex mental health or diet recovery. I'm also talking about the complex relationships that can come up when we have a diagnosis like celiac disease or diabetes or anything, or we live with a lifetime of acne, for example, where we feel under enormous pressure to make all these dietary changes to quote unquote kind of deal with this thing that shows up for us. So our training is insufficient, but that's not where it ends. I've got a 5-year degree and I never stop training, ever. I mean, my accountant had to sit me down last year and say, excuse me, can we talk about your professional development bill? And I'm like, I kind of threw my hands in the air and made like a helpless puppy face at him. I was like, I just take my money. So that's the short answer. And also our scope of practice really, it expands the more that we get training and support. And if I have done the training and I'm having appropriate supervision for the work that I'm doing, I am absolutely in my scope of practice. Absolutely, 100%.
For sure.
I would
So,
add on,
anyway.
if it's
Yeah,
okay,
go,
if
Sammy.
I
Yeah,
add
please
on,
add.
Fee, just because I relate to, honestly, Jen, I think I asked that exact question in September when I met them at the conference, and that, Fee gave a similar answer. And I think a big part of it is the continuing education. I know, like, if you asked me 3 years ago if I felt comfortable doing the counseling that I do now, absolutely not. I would refer out for that because I didn't know how to work with that. But I think it becomes, once we find like those same problems that people are having in front of us, and realizing that like handing them a meal plan isn't going to change anything if they have morality tied to food, if they can't listen to their hunger and fullness cues, if they have trauma, and a lot of times that stuff is so present that nutrition is still a part of it. And that's something I think I thought that becoming an intuitive eating counselor, becoming a non-diet dietitian meant we don't talk about food.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually like the mecca. That's like once we realize like food's not the issue, we deal with all this stuff, and then we get to food, and then it's like, okay, we can work on nutrient density and all of that. But if we start with that right out of the gate, to a lot of people, if there's a poor relationship with food, it just kind of becomes that other diet because they can't see past all of that other stuff. But then also my secondary answer to that is like absolutely building a referral system. Of course, when there's deep trauma and there's things that are out of our scope, no, you're not supposed to be a therapist or a mental health counselor. And a lot of my clients do work with both us and like, of course, that would be ideal if all of them did, but it's hard to do that. But those that do see it as more of a multidisciplinary team, that's super helpful. For sure. But going through the intuitive eating training and learning all about introspective awareness, and really it's taking away the external. So not what can I eat, when can I eat, how should I do this, what are my rules, what do I need to follow, what am I feeling, what are my physical sensations that are coming up in my body. And that's something I know, Jenna, that you already teach. You turn people to how does that food make you feel instead of what should I be eating? So it's exactly what we've both been saying, is really just building more continuing education on that. So you feel comfortable saying like, sit with your eyes closed and your feet on the ground and tell me like, what does hunger feel like to you? Like, and at first, like, I know Fee, you did a training with us like that in DC. I was like, I feel weird. Like, I don't know how to do this. Like, it's different. It's a different form of counseling. It's really getting in touch with the body. It is very close to that Zen yoga kind of stuff.
Spiritual.
But it gets people, again, people have built such a distrust with their body due to the disturbances of diet culture. So it's learning how to reject all of that and trust that there's nothing wrong with their body and they have everything that they need. And again, those are things you're already teaching, Jenna.
It makes me feel so much better to hear you both say these things, because I really do all of that. I think that the problem maybe, and I feel like I'm turning this into like a session about me. I feel bad. I think the issue is really like when you take a person on into your practices, the expectations I think on my end need to be clearer. I think that's an area that I can for sure improve on, that because most people come into me, I don't want to trick them and say, you're not going to lose weight or I'm not going to help you. I'm very clear that we're going to work on your behaviors first. And if your body changes, that's great. But conversation after conversation, that comes up. And so I think I need to be clearer about, who I work with. And that's not to say any client of mine that's listening that we're not doing this the right way and the best way for you. But, it does, what you're saying resonates with me so much because, and Fiona, I've talked about this in previous episodes before. I mean, my history with diet culture is disgusting. Like
most white women have.
I am a victim of that diet culture bullshit. And I was actually talking to my mom yesterday because I was talking to her about, like, I had this moment where I was like, I feel so awful for the clients that I worked with 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Like, I damaged those people and maybe they don't realize it, but like, I want to send all of them a letter of my apology for like what, anything that I had to do with their cycle of just unhappiness, and like what a shitty feeling. All we can do is change it going forward. But if any of you are listening, I am so sorry. It's just such a terrible feeling, but like we come out of school and that's what we're told to do.
Absolutely. And that's what people come to us wanting too, Jenna, which is what you were saying. It's like, well, so, and this is part of diet culture bullshittery, right? Is that dietitians are pegged as the weight loss people, and apparently we have this tool or this skill or this thing in our top drawer that we pull out, that we know stuff that other people don't, and that is not true. We know it's not true. Right. And actually I think a lot of us know it's not true in our hearts, so we bunker down and defend that. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I think it's really an uncomfortable truth to think, oh Jesus, like our whole profession is built on some untruths in lots of ways, and it's really uncomfortable. But if it's helpful to you, would it be helpful to you, Jenna, for me to kind of to assist you, because this is a podcast and people are listening, right? To assist you with how you can start having those conversations with people, because honestly, and I wonder if you observe this too, Sammy, that is a dietitian's number one question. But people are coming to me wanting weight loss. I don't want to dash their dreams. Right. I don't want to, I also have a business to run. How can I be true to this weight inclusive anti-diet philosophy whilst also supporting people with where they're at? And I think this is quite complex. So would it be helpful, Jenna, if I kind of talked you through that?
Hell yeah.
Okay. So the first thing is, and I can tell you're already picking up on this because you used the words before, and that is setting a foundation. So from the moment, okay, so I'll ask you this, Jenna. How do people find you?
Instagram.
Okay, Instagram. And so what are they seeing and noticing? Like what are they seeing and noticing on Instagram?
I would say that what I try to portray the most is how much I love food and how much I eat. I'm constantly eating and cooking, and I work from home, so they're seeing that. But I think that they're also seeing positive energy in addition to exercise. So I don't know if that falls into a bad category, but exercise is like very important to me, and I do share, when I'm exercising, so people find me through those ways as well, which might be a trigger.
Well, so people are finding you first through kind of a food and exercise image-based medium, right? And from there, people would, I'm assuming, they would click on your bio and find a website. Is that right?
Yes.
And then what are they seeing there?
It's being completely redone at the moment.
Okay. So are they seeing some imagery? Are they seeing some words? What are they?
They're seeing recipes for the most part, which is why it's being redone.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking you this is because the first contact we have with people, unless we work in a group practice where our appointments are made for us, which is, for some people that is the case, like literally the very first meeting is when they walk into your office type thing. Mm-hmm. But for a vast majority of us, people will find us either through social media or through our website. And so the very first impressions that people get of what to expect from you, including the kind of way that you are in the world, that imagery, and what you're promoting, that sets up an expectation. It might be unspoken, but it definitely sets up an expectation. So if I saw imagery of somebody exercising in a smaller, wide appearing body, female, and recipes and food, if I came to you, I would be expecting you to be telling me what to eat and be handing me a meal plan and give me recipe ideas and things like that. I would also expect that you wouldn't necessarily talk to me about eating behavior or body image or be talking about your relationship with food. So if you were my supervisee and you said, I'm getting all these people. And I'm guessing that with the revamp of the website, you've already picked this up, and that is you would need to be more overt with what people can expect and be more transparent with what people can expect. Now, in saying that, what I'm not saying is you're being dishonest and not transparent. But more to point out, or the invitation is more to think about, how can I help people to understand a lot more about what I'm about before they even step foot in here, so that if we are talking about relationships with food, or we are talking about appetite awareness, or I do want to ask some of those maybe a little bit tricky mental health questions, which I think every dietitian should be asking, that it's not going to be like, why are you asking me this? I just want a friggin' recipe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And I know that was like super condensed.
No, it was. I took
first
notes.
You're writing notes.
I have notes.
So that's the first thing, and often that needs to all be kind of set up. Yeah,
I think what I've struggled with for the past 6 to 8 months, I'd say, is confusion. So I think that if you were to look at my Instagram right now, I think you too, maybe both of you even, might be confused as to, like, there's definitely splinters like flying out of her ass right now.
You're in a stage of change, Jenna. It sounds like you're in a stage of change.
You'll see the core of what's there, because I do use a lot of words and like fun and whatever, but there's could definitely still be some, from a professional opinion, some triggers of the middle of the fence area. And that's definitely going to be something that I start auditing a little bit more closely.
Well, that can be something that you can take to a trusted person. So someone like Sammy is definitely somebody who's like, hey, I'll buy you dinner. 35 dinners. Can you look through my stuff and give me some honest feedback? Because there's nothing like honest feedback from somebody who you trust. Like, thank goodness, someone like you, Sammy, is just so open-hearted. And it's just so receiving, not everybody is like that, but also you thoughtfully chose people to, as like mentors and teachers, who you knew that they really cared about you. There wasn't some stranger on the internet. It was somebody who really cared about, or people who really cared about you, really cared to help you learn. So, I mean, Sammy, I'm so interested, if it's okay to ask you about that, is, so if people do want to learn more and they're like, oh, yes, what is that feeling I have in my butt? It's a splinter. It's a million splinters. So how would you suggest people go about that process, do you think?
Do you mean exactly what you were just answering for Jenna? Yeah. So I would say one thing to keep in mind too, Jenna, is no matter what your messaging is, you're always going to get people that come to you that want to lose weight because you're a dietitian. Yeah. And that's okay, right? We're not against people who want to lose weight. It's then your opportunity to say, and again, these are things I think you're already doing, of like, if you're trying to improve your health, we can focus on behaviors, etc. But for us, like when we had the big shift in messaging, we've had such an uptick of people that already understand they don't want to diet. They don't want to focus on the scale. They're like the idealist of ideal clients, and you're just like welcoming them with opening arms, versus our old messaging. When we were in that stage of change, that exact confusion that you're feeling, you're getting all these people that are like, I want to lose 10 pounds by next week. And then you have to be like, no, but I can help you with your behaviors. But then there's like, they have, again, that expectation. So I think that's a huge part of it. And we're actually also in the process of revamping our entire website, because it hasn't been changed in 4 years since we've had this huge change. And so, it's definitely a transitional period, but I think just leaning, like we've said this whole podcast, leaning into that feeling and knowing it's like a normal thing. You saw me go through it, Jenna. So I'm happy to be that person for you. So you don't need to leave the field. You don't need to shut down your business whatsoever. If anything, you already are helping people. It's just equipping yourself to feel more confident to continuously kind of just work through that stuff with people.
Yeah, that's so well said.
And just to know that people care. I mean, this is actually really cool. I don't know if you've kind of done this in this way on the podcast before, but it's actually kind of cool, right? But it's kind of cool because what you've brought to us, Jenna, is like the question I answer all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
That was what I asked Fee and
Mhm.
Haley. I was like, it's just like, how do I do this? How do I help people? I want to run a business. They already think that, like, that's the $1 million question. And at the end of the day, understanding that intuitive eating or haze or whatever you want to call it, you are helping people become healthier, because I think that could be a whole nother podcast episode. Maybe we'll get into that with Haley, because we have her next week. Like, and she put up a post today. People think that anti-diet, non-diet means you don't care about health. It's the complete opposite. It's literally the complete opposite.
And it's such a hard message to share with people loudly, because I don't know if you two feel this way, but I think there's so many supporters of you, and your communities are built off of the supporters of that message. But like, diet culture is so loud, and they make haze and intuitive eating like seem like the devil to some extent. Does that make sense? Like, they make it seem so. My dog somehow got into this room, and I don't know how he got here, but that's why I'm looking down. But it's like, it's such a hard, I mean, I can't imagine, you know, some of like the struggles that you come up against, but you're two very strong, amazing women that are really paving the way for so many people. And it's just like, this has been I can't believe how fast the time has gone by.
I know.
I want to be fair to Fiona's boys and their soccer games or whatever they have today. But I mean, I never want this conversation to end, because it just feels so natural.
Yeah. And it won't end. We'll be here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just such a crazy thing. Like, could you imagine being an intuitive eating dietitian in ShopRite, Sammy?
No. That's why I'm not there anymore. But no, and you know, I think it just shows, like, you know, our field is evolving, the research is evolving. Just, I think the big takeaway from this, and Fiona, tell me if I'm wrong, is just continue to be curious, continue to lean in. For any dietitians listening, for any RDs to be that are just like, I don't know if I want to be in this field anymore. It's just continuing to grow and continuing to listen and follow that intuition and those feelings that you're feeling in your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I would concur with that 100%, Sammy. I think part of it, part of the work is also taking our time. And as dietitians, we're often, not always, but often so used to, okay, what's the next thing to do, you know, and rushing. But this actually, it's a slow process. Like, and it mimics the process that our clients go through too. So if we are asking our clients to do the hard work to develop a new way of being in the world that doesn't include dominant diet culture, or that they are aware enough of diet culture that they can be thoughtful about how, when, and why they would engage, then, you know, we kind of owe it to each other and ourselves and our clients too to be doing the work at the same time. And so when we say doing the work, there are a couple of things there. There is the formal training and the professional development and workshops and all that kind of stuff. But that's only the start, really, to be honest. And I think, well, that's been my experience, is it's only the start. And if nothing else, it kind of opens up more boxes and you're like, oh shit, it's another box. Crap.
It's happened to me.
Right, exactly. It just opens up more stuff, right? But then that's only the start of it. The second part is the ongoing work. So things like seeking a supervisor. I find it really frustrating when people are like, oh, I don't work in eating disorders. I don't need a supervisor. And I'm like, are you a human being that works with other human beings? Then you need a supervisor. Yeah. So a supervisor is not someone who tells you what to do. It's basically like a dietetic therapist. Exactly what it is. It's like that, you know. I take business dilemmas to my supervisor. I take, you know, tricky endings with clients to a supervisor. I take my own shit to a supervisor. Like, it's so good. It's so good. And then also just reflective work. So similar kind of reflective work that we would do as a student, you know, it's like you're taking the time to really understand ourselves and understand how our own buttons get pushed as well, you know, and that's just constant work. I don't think that ever ends. So I used to find that overwhelming. I'm like, oh my God. Ah! Whereas now I find it exciting. Like, I find it really, it's like, what? I'm mid-career, because I'm literally probably mid-career now. I'm like, what? My learning never ends? Cool. That's really cool. I don't feel overwhelmed by that anymore. I'm like, this is so cool. Excellent. And now I'm in this such fortunate position. I mean, as you know, Sammy, I'm now doing much more kind of training and education of other health professionals, and mostly dietitians, but kind of a range of health professionals. And I'm like, oh man, this is such a privilege to be in this space where people want to learn. They're here, they're invested their time, energy, resources to learn, and that we can kind of, really get the message out there in ways that are really meaningful.
Yeah. Well, again, we could keep going for probably hours at this point, but you have basketball games to get to, I believe. So
wait, there's one quote though that's on here that I think is like the perfect way to end it before you ask her the final question, Sammy. And I don't know where our amazing interns found this, but I feel like this is like defines who you are, and what I've learned from this conversation the most. But this is air quoted, so hopefully you said this.
Hopefully they didn't quote us out of it.
I'll let you know.
It says, if I've done my job well as a dietitian, you'll be listening to yourself more than you're listening to me. And I think that's so beautiful. I could actually start crying because I feel like if more dietitians could understand the true layers of what that means, we could be saving so many more lives. And this is not like the second time I've cried today on a podcast.
We had 2 podcasts today. We've cried on both. So
it's just so that, I mean, that gives me the chills because there's no better feeling than that. And that is something that, I mean, wow. So thank you for that. And all of this. And now you take it away, Sam.
Well, so to wrap up again, thank you, Fiona, for being here. And we will, in the future, we'll have you on for counseling session part 2. It'll be down the road, hopefully after we come to one of your workshops again. But so for anyone who's listening or watching, just how can they find you, or what's the best way for them to get in contact with you, Fee?
Yeah, thank you, Sammy. So now I think almost everything is under the Mindful Dietitian. So the website is themindfuldietitian.com.au because the AU is Australia, and that's just how my websites work. And then I'm pretty active on Instagram as well. So that's the Mindful Dietitian. And if you are a health professional or dietitian, then we have a pretty active Facebook group, also called The Mindful Dietitian. Now, that is actually a closed group, which means that there are some questions. So I'm like standing at the door saying, hello, Jenna, welcome to The Mindful Dietitian. Tell me a bit about yourself. And this is a bit about the group. Do you agree to these kind of, these group guidelines? So it'll be like, tick, tick. Hello, welcome, Jenna. Welcome to The Mindful Dietitian, a place where you can unload and you can feel the warmth of community and see feisty people. meet lots of feisty people. Yeah. So that's where you can find. I'll also have the Mindful Dietitian podcast as well. But in order to find me,
episode 49.
Fiona Willer. Oh yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. We'll put that one in the show notes, and that's what I quoted today on social media. It's amazing. Well, thank you, Fee, for sharing your Saturday morning with our Friday night.
It's Saturday. Looking good over there.
Yeah,
it is. It's a sunny day. It's beautiful.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Fee. We appreciate you more than you know. And cheers to you. And we hope to see you again soon.
Cheers to you.
Guys, thank you so much for listening and being here with us. I am virtually cheersing all of you. We absolutely loved sipping on a cocktail with you and sharing as many nutrition tipsies as possible during this episode. We know there are a ton of pods out there, and we are so appreciative of your time that you spent listening to us today. Please be sure to check out the show notes for episode details and all of our guest information. We promise to keep bringing you the best and the most knowledgeable and fun guests we possibly can. Please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and post if you enjoyed our content today. And visit us on Instagram and Facebook at Drunk Dietitians to find out what is up next for us on the pod. We absolutely love you. We appreciate you and can't wait to spend more time cheersing with you soon.